Guys, we're currently in Cannock Chase at a place called Six Crones. I've never heard of it either, but anyway, let's get into it.
There's a spot just off Seven Springs on Cannock Chase that most people wouldn't even realise has a name. But if you speak to the right people or spend enough time looking into this area, you'll hear it called the Six Crones. And when you first hear that, it sounds like it should come with some kind of big story attached to it. But the reality of it's actually a lot more interesting because it's written into the landscape itself rather than into any record. If you come out here to walk your dog or just go for a mooch, then what you'll find is a small body of water sitting low in the ground. Not something that's been dug out or shaped, but something that's naturally formed, most likely fed by the same spring system that gives Seven Springs its name. And that matters because water like this on the Chase isn't new. It's been moving through this ground long before any of the paths or routes that people use today were ever trodden down. Around that water, and this is where the name really starts to make sense, you've got 6 trees that stand out from anything else around them. Not because they're especially tall or impressive on their own, but because of how they sit together. Each one slightly different in shape, slightly bent or twisted in its own way, and clearly old enough to have been there for a long time without any kind of interference. Yet it seems they've all been equally spaced. Now the word crone isn't just something that sounds eerie for the sake of it, it's an old term that was used to describe an older woman. Usually someone who lived a bit more on the edge of things or kept themselves to themselves. A bit like our Bertha from Lichfield. Over time it picked up associations with wisdom, isolation and in some cases suspicion. Especially in rural areas where anything a bit unusual tended to be given a name that people could pass on. What you tend to find with places like this, especially on Cannock Chase, is that the names don't usually come from a single event. Nothing that you can point to. They just come from repetition, from people noticing something distinctive and describing it a way that sticks. And then that description slowly becomes the name that everyone uses without really questioning where it started. So instead of this being a place where 6 women once stood or anything like that, which there's no solid evidence for, it's far more likely that what you're looking at is a natural feature that's been given a human identity over time. Because 6 old, slightly twisted trees standing around a quiet pool of water is exactly the kind of thing that people remember. And more importantly, the kind of thing that they talk about. And when you stop and look back at the wider area, it fits perfectly with how Cannock Chase works as a landscape. Because a lot of it's been left to grow and change on its own terms, which means features like this can sit here for decades, if not longer, quietly becoming part of local knowledge rather than anything officially recorded. And I think that's why I can't find much written down about the Six Crones, at least not in any formal sense, because it doesn't come from any documented event or a named landmark. It comes from the kind of place that happens naturally when people spend enough time in a place to start giving it parts of their own identity. And once a name like that settles in, especially one as distinctive as this, it doesn't really go anywhere, even if the reason behind it isn't fully understood anymore. Because the feature itself is still here, the water's still sitting in the same place, and those same 6 haggard looking trees still standing around it, holding that shape that gave it its name in the first place. So when you hear the Six Crones, it's not really pointing you towards a story that happened here. It's pointing you towards something that you can still see. Something that's been part of this landscape for long enough for people to notice it. And when I was standing there yesterday looking at it properly, it's easy to see how a place like that ends up with a name like this. Because even without anything dramatic behind it, it's still just unusual enough to stay with you. If there's anyone out there that has more information on this, then please shout yourself up. This is all the information that I've been able to find in the time that I allow myself to do these videos. I'm sure there's some kind of folklore stories attached to these trees. I've just not heard them yet.